For my oral presentation to end the oral communication unit, I will be focusing on my parents' paths of immigration to Canada, and more specifically, how Canadian culture and society has changed from the time they were beginning to grow up here to the present age. My father came to Canada a little later than my mom when he was just 5 years old. His parents believed that they would receive a better life with greater opportunities for themselves and their children by leaving their life in England. My mother, who was originally born in Germany, emigrated to Canada with her family at the young age of 3 years old. What started as an impulse adventure when my Oma was 20 ended up being the place she would return to with her husband and where they would raise their family. My grandmother originally came to Canada in her 20s for work. At the time, the company she was with in Germany was sending many of its workers over to Canada. However, they were not allowing women to go. This is much different than the society we live in the current day, where women in Canada are greatly encouraged to create their own destiny. Nowadays, we are lucky to live in a place where men and women are treated and seen as equals with the same job opportunities. With the opportunity to work for her then company taken off the table, my Oma had to find her own way of sustaining herself in Canada. She took it upon herself to find a new job as a nanny in Montreal, confirm a place to live, and find her own transportation all the way from Germany to Montreal. My Oma found an inexpensive spot on a cargo ship headed north with only 6 other individuals on board. Though the crew battled tough terrain, they made it there safely, excited to embark on a new journey. Nowadays, we often take how easily accessible our transportation is for granted. If I wanted to take a trip to Germany, I could easily buy a plane ticket and be on my way. Back then, traveling to a great distance was very complicated, took lots of planning, and often was dangerous due to rough terrain and weather conditions. It wasn't until she met my future grandfather that the choice was made to go back to Germany, where my mother and her 3 siblings were born. At the time, my grandfather was enlisted in the Canadian military. There were numerous camps in Germany, and my grandmother and him made the choice to move back. However, it wasn't long before my grandfather got very sick, and my grandma made the decision to move the family back to Canada. After speaking with my Oma, I think the most noticeable difference between life in Germany and life in Canada was the school system. Growing up in Germany, she was the only child for about 4 years until her younger brother was born. Growing up the oldest, this meant she was responsible for running errands and helping lots around the house as she got older. In Germany, children attend school from 9 a.m. until 12 p.m. Then they are sent home to eat, complete homework, and help their family with chores. This is much different than elementary and high school here in Canada, which you attend typically from 8:30 a.m. until 3 p.m. After my grandmother explained how the education system worked in Germany and how beneficial it was for not only the children, but their parents as well, I think it would be interesting if Canada adapted the same technique. Since school ends so late, there leaves little room for homework and chores. Nowadays, the percentage of kids in extracurricular activities is also much higher. With longer school days, greater amounts of homework, and higher number of kids participating in extracurricular activities, this leaves little time for helping parents with errands and just spending time with family and friends in general. I also noticed how much immigration policies have changed from the time my grandma came over to Canada to what they are now. Prior to traveling to Canada, my grandma had to have a full medical exam. This included a scan of her lungs to ensure she didn't have any diseases like pneumonia, multiple immunizations, and many other procedures. She also had to find her own way of getting to Canada. Since she worked in the import-export business in Germany, she was lucky enough to find a connection through a friend of a cargo ship that was set to bring goods from Germany through Montreal and then to Chicago. Herself, along with 6 other individuals, made the trip with lots of packed goods all the way across the ocean. Back in those days, the government would pay for the trip across, however she had to pay them back, every penny, in a 2-year span. If she did not pay back the fee for her travel expenses in time, she would be sent back to Germany. My grandmother had to ensure she had a job in place and a location to live well before she was allowed to make the trip over. She had to commit herself to working as a household helper. For a woman in Montreal, prior to coming to Canada. Canada's original immigration policies were initially fueled by desire for expansion, with most of its immigrants settling in rural areas. She also had to know the basis of English in order to communicate with others before she came to the country. However, this wasn't a problem, as she has a background in French and English from learning it in classes at school. My Oma had to take it upon herself to better her English from the individuals around her by taking night classes and by practicing on her own. In the early 20th century, Canada began to control the flow of immigrants. The government adopted policies that excluded applicants who were not of European descent. By 1976, well after my grandmother immigrated to Canada, new laws removed this ethnic criteria, and Canada became a destination for immigrants from a large variety of countries. These policies remain today. In present-day Canada, there are three main categories of immigrants: family class, those who are closely related to Canadian residents living in Canada; economic immigrants, those who are skilled workers and business people; and refugees, those who are escaping persecution, torture, or cruel and unusual punishment and are accepted as immigrants for humanitarian or compassionate reasons. Immigration numbers continue to rise each year, as Canada is among the world's most generous nations for immigrants and has one of the highest per capita admission rates. Nowadays, the Canadian government also provides immigrants with language training and access to Canada's national health care and social welfare programs. Since my parents first located to Canada, the society, government, economic status, religions, employment, and culture have grown and changed into what we now know in the present day. Nowadays, people in Canada are more accepting of individuals' differences, including ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. In 1960, the average household in Canada was very different than the ones you see today. 50 years ago, divorce was difficult to obtain and very rare. Homosexuality was illegal and was looked down upon so greatly it could earn you a prison sentence. Later in the decade, the then Justice Minister, Pierre Trudeau, liberalized laws on divorce and homosexuality. From the 1960s to 1990s, divorce rates increased more than 5 times. Gay marriage was also legalized within that time period. As a country, we have become more inclusive and put laws in place to protect those of different cultures and races. I am very proud to have grown up in a country that is so accepting and celebrates the differences of every individual in the community.